I am light, you are light, I see you. But your distortion is not something I want to deal with at the moment, because it's not mine to work through. It's your karmic path to work through. So I always like to think of it as the Dalai Lama. I sometimes have this illusion of how the Dalai Lama must look at us. And he probably looks at us and goes, wow, that person has created that much suffering in order to learn some karmic lesson. And I can't change that karmic lesson. It's theirs to learn and navigate through. And so I must let them do their karma. Now, if they ask me for support and help, I will help them. But if they don't ask me for support and help, then their awareness is not to the place that they're able to break through yet. So I must practice compassion and just have abject compassion. So what I love about the Tarot is the Tarot teaches me that compassion, because it teaches me that all of the cards have value. All of the pathways have value. All the steps are essential steps in the evolution of your consciousness. And eventually you come to an end point. And when and everyone's done this, you've had something where you've moved through and you've come to an end point and you feel really complete. You feel really aligned. You feel at peace. And then you feel ready to move on to the next thing. So then it starts over again. So then you go back to the Fool. So in my example, I was a ballet dancer, so there was this whole process of facing the dark cards in ballet because of the competition and the fear and the insecurity and the power plays and all of that, and then putting yourself on stage and falling and making mistakes and and having the whole audience go ah! like this and feeling embarrassed. And so there's all those dark energies that are obvious whenever you put yourself in a performing or situation where people have to observe you or see you. And then there was a point where I was done. I was done. It's like I had learned everything that I could learn. And even with myself, it took almost 3 years for me to admit to myself that I was done. Like, I knew I was done, but I was afraid to let it go because I was attached. My ego was attached to the power and the influence and the fame and being important and being the ballerina. And so then there's these lessons of letting go of that identity too. So completion also requires a tremendous letting go of your identity. And then I had to start over. So I became a massage therapist. So I went back to school, which is again the communication card, and having to learn all those skills again. And same thing with being a psychic, though I was a psychic for my whole life from the time I was a kid. But I saw psychic stuff as sort of a game. I saw it sort of as a parlor game. I didn't really take it seriously until I was in my 20s. So as a result, it's like what I love about the Tarot is it's going to teach you all about yourself. It's going to teach you where you're afraid of parts of yourself. It's going to teach you where you have judgments inside yourself. And it's going to give you tools to get out of those or to get through them by looking at them. So in the book you're going to notice that there's affirmations that you can do when you're working with the card. I have a CD set that is meditations on the major arcana, so that if you really have a problem with a particular card, like it's always so funny to me, people go, that card keeps showing up. Why does that card keep showing up? And I'm like, because you haven't integrated that lesson. Like, you don't actually understand that lesson in this context, because in every context you might have a different understanding or awareness or a deepening of that archetype depending on the different tool and place you are in time, okay? So, but you're going to have affirmations, there's meditations, there's a way to integrate it. And so the first thing I always like to do with everybody is to kind of say, okay, every part of you is good, every part of you is divine, even your fearful parts are divine, even your angry parts are divine, that all emotions are God moving through the kinks in your nervous system. So anger is God's love and energy moving through a certain distortion wave in your energy field. Fear is the same thing, just moving through a different distortion field. So did you ever notice that when you're angry, you're almost always angry because you feel like your boundary is being overridden. So anger is oftentimes related to a boundary override. So you're like, stop, that's not okay for me. Stop, that's not okay for me. And when people keep pushing, then all of a sudden you go, ugh! And you just like get really, really angry. But what you're trying to do isn't a bad thing. You're trying to say enough already, but you don't know how to do it maybe in an appropriate fashion to make people aware that you need them to stop. And the same thing with fear. Fear is almost always related to hurt in some way. So it's sort of like, I'm feeling hurt, so now I'm scared because I'm not good enough. And so you have to look at all these interesting little twists, but it's all sweet. I mean, if you're feeling hurt, that's sweet. I mean, you care. You know, you're hurt because you care. And you want to do the right thing. And so then you're scared that you're not going to be doing the right thing. And then you're scared that you're not good enough in some way. So that's what's so fascinating about the Tarot, is that you're going to learn all of these little twists that you've got inside of yourself. And what I like people to do with the Tarot is use these archetypes as a pathway inside yourself first. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at these cards and go, how does that relate to me, or how does that relate to somebody else in my life? So what's cool in the Tarot is that there are a whole bunch of cards that overlap. What I mean by that is that there's the Emperor card, which is like the super King Arthur, powerful, masculine, good guy, save the world, protect the weak kind of card. Then there is the Knight of Discs, and the Knight of Discs is the husbandman, the patient, laborious, clever, and prosperous in material things man, like the perfect ideal man that every woman wants to marry. Then there is the Prince of Discs, and the Prince of Discs, hi there, come on in. How are you?
I'm late.
That's okay. That's totally okay.
Well, I was just a few blocks from here at 9:45.
Oh, I believe you.
I was
And
in
there was,
Detroit.
yeah.
I had to go out to 78 South from here, and then go east, and then come in on 215.
Oh yeah, it's been crazy because of the marathon. Yeah. So anyway, then there is the Prince of Discs, and the Prince of Discs is a card that's kind of the old school male. So I always characterize this as my grandfather, the old, super religious, old school kind of guy that's somewhat resentful of spiritual types, and is real traditional in his format, and he wants to do things in a certain way, in a certain flow, and there's right and wrong, and this is the way we're going to do it, and he's a super good guy, but he's traditional in his approach. So notice there's 3 male archetypes there, and you might notice, like me, one of them is like my grandfather, one of them is like my husband, and one of them is like this ideal masculine that's really powerful and beautiful. So you will notice that when you're dealing with cards and somebody says, well, I need to pick cards, but I don't know whether to pick that one or that one, I'll say to them, pick both. And as they pick both, they're going to pick 2 versions of the same thing. Okay, so that they're literally confused. It actually tells me something, that they don't know whether they want this version of this archetype or this version of this archetype. Okay, so that's what makes the Tarot really interesting and complex, because it'll show you layers, and depending on how deep you want to go, it'll go further and further. So the major arcana are the spiritual pathways that you will naturally encounter whenever you're learning something. The minor arcana represent the more mundane day-to-day detail things. So think of the minor arcana. The wands are fire. So the wands are energy. And so whenever you have something, you have a spiritual path, you're on a spiritual journey, but you need energy. You need energy to do anything, right? So the wands always tell you how your energy's doing. If your energy's working, if your energy's not working, and if it's blocked, if you're feeling resistance, like it tells you how the energy's going. Then there's cups, and cups represent the emotion of something, because in order to manifest anything, you need emotional depth too. So as a result, now you've got energy, but now you have feelings. You have energy and feelings, and so the wands are telling you how the energy's going, the cups are telling you how your emotions are going with that. Then you've got swords, and swords tell you about how your mind is going. It represents air. So then you think, okay, what's my mind doing with this? And what you'll notice with the minor arcana with the swords is the swords are kind of some heavy cards. So as we do the swords, you're kind of going to go, you know, it's like just getting through the swords, you're going to suddenly be like, oh my gosh, this is sort of heavy, but it's because the mind is really not your friend sometimes. And learning to discipline the mind in a way that's constructive for your being, that allows your emotions to flow and your energy to flow, is tricky. Because my mind is an endless maze, and it will undercut me, it'll minimize me, it'll tell me I'm not good enough, and so it's all that internal chatter that undermines the expression of your authentic self. And no matter what, the exploration of the tarot is about finding the expression of your authentic self, or finding the expression of the person you're reading. But the swords can get really kind of bogged down. And then there's discs, and discs always represent the earth energy, the physical manifestation energy, the materialism energy, the money. And so a lot of people think, oh, you know, that sounds kind of dense, but if you want to manifest anything in the physical world, you have to be able to navigate the physical plane. Like, you have to know that there's certain rules to earth. Like, you know, you can't just say, well, I'm going to be a millionaire. And I'm like, okay, that's air, so notice that's mind, that's swords. So my mind says I want to be a millionaire, and then you'll notice that they have no clue how to take the first step in the physical plane. And the earth cards, the discs, are going to tell you, you need to do this, and then you need to do that, and then you need to do that, because you can't just jump huge leaps. Every once in a while you can, but most of the time you have to do certain sequences. So what's cool is that the tarot, and what Aleister Crowley did with the tarot, is that he put them in a sequence. So there's an easy, logical sequence to flow. Just like you start a job, you learn the skills, and you keep going through into the completion place. It's the same thing with the wands. Energy begins, and then as energy moves, you have to learn how to navigate expansions of more energy, and the same thing is true with the cups. You feel something, and then it deepens and expands, and then it contracts, and it expands, and it contracts, right? And then the mind the same way. I have this idea, but then my mind can really mess with it and undermine me and tell me I'm not good enough, and I have to navigate my mind in order to find a resolution. And then the same thing with the earth energy or the discs. I have to begin a project. I have to consistently work at it and chip away at it. I can't just expect other people to do it for me. I have to learn responsibility. I have to be accountable. I have to have other people make me accountable. And then in doing that, you create wealth and prosperity. Okay? So what you'll find in life is that there are people that are really good with one particular section. So millionaires, for an example, would be really good with the energy of something, and then the making of the money of the something. So what happens is they're really good at wands, and they're really good at discs. Okay, so they know the sequence. So I know a lot of clients that are millionaires, and it's really funny because if they know how to make $1 million, they always know how to make $1 million, right? So there's a certain sequence to making money, and really it's just about follow through. You know, it's really simple. You start something and you just keep chipping away at it. It's kind of like Colonel Sanders. You know, they said, I can't remember how many times Colonel Sanders tried to sell his recipe. It was like 500 times. And you know, every time he refined it, he tried it a little different. He presented it a little different. He did it a little different. That's all discs. That's all the earth energy. It's like you have to keep at something. If you keep at something, you will eventually create success at that. So there's this book that actually talks about that in order to master anything, you have to do it 10,000 times. Okay? So I look at myself as a ballet dancer. Have I done 10,000 pliés in my life? You bet. Have I done 10,000 grand jetés in my life? You bet. Have I done 10,000 readings in my life? You bet. Have I done 10,000 massages? Maybe close, okay, in my life. So the more you do something, the more you become the master of it. So as you play with this, I want you to play with it. Use these archetypes as reflections of yourself and say, who do these cards relate to in my life? So that when you see that card, it's like, oh, that's like my Aunt da-da-da. And so then when you're reading for somebody, you say, you know, this card is like my Aunt da-da-da. Let me tell you about her. She's kind of like this. Do you have anybody in your life like my Aunt da-da-da? And they'll say, oh yeah, you know, that's my son, right? And so immediately they relate to that card in some way, and then you will find that those archetypes are always consistent. It's really wild. Like in your life right now, you have people that are exactly these archetypes. Right? And then once you understand that, you can relate it to other people, and so then they're like, oh yeah, I totally understand that